As you know, they say that Republicans fall in line, Democrats want to fall in love. And as you know, Michael falls in and out of love with a lot of different number twos running for presidential election.
That's correct.
Marianne.
One day it's Marianne Williamson. The next day it's this guy. And I have a feeling that on this Tuesday, Michael's heart has been given to Bill de Blasio. As you know, as you heard, we had some flash flooding, but we've obviously had some power outages because, well, the thing is, we don't know why we've had power outages. I can tell you something that's very predictable. There will always be 3 or 4 days, sometimes it's a week or two, where New York City will hit 90 degrees plus, and it's super hot, and everybody doesn't want to do anything. They just go into their apartments, and they turn on their air conditioning. Now, you do not have to be an expert to know that when everybody turns on their air conditioning, it's going to put strain on the grid. This is not a new phenomena. Theoretically, the company that has a monopoly on providing power for people should be set up to address this. But one thing that we know for sure in every circumstance, when you talk about private enterprise, sometimes they'll do horrific things if they think that it will make them profits and they only have to pay back a little bit of that money. I see this every time I go to Las Vegas and talk to tort lawyers. Pharmaceutical companies, yeah, we knew it caused this problem, we knew it caused that problem, or we knew the manufacturer of this active ingredient was letting jet fuel in it. However, we had already expended a lot of money and we made a lot of money from it, and then we know down the road it's always cheaper to say you're sorry than to ask for permission. And we don't know why we have these blackouts. We don't know for sure why Con Ed decided to shut down the power in areas that may have people with less incomes or not as much political power because maybe they're not white. But we do know that we should get answers, and if we don't get those answers, there's a problem. And it would be nice to have things like power be something that we never have to think, did they just put on a fewer people or not upgrade their infrastructure as much because they want to save money? Because some of this money has to go to shareholders. What if all that money that didn't go to shareholders went into rebuilding the grid or maintaining the grid or improving the grid? What if all that extra cash just actually went to providing the service to people that everybody knows they're going to need going forward? Bill de Blasio is sort of toying with that idea.
To tell us what happened, why it happened, how they are taking steps to make sure it won't happen again. They have not given me a good answer. This situation in Brooklyn came at the very tail end of the heat emergency. So obviously Con Ed knew they were dealing with an extraordinary situation. Once again, I spoke to the Con Ed president last night. I spoke to him this morning. No answers whatsoever as to why this happened and what is being done to ensure it will not happen again. This was obviously a predictable situation and therefore preventable. What we're getting continually is no clarity, no answers, no real timelines from Con Ed. So at this point, I said earlier in the week that I was having trouble trusting them. I can't trust them at this point because I'm not getting any real answers, and they have let New Yorkers down once again. It's very clear there needs to be a full investigation into what happened not only last Saturday, but what happened last night. It's very clear we have to question whether Con Ed, as it's structured now, can do the job going forward or whether we need to go to an entirely different approach. So I'm calling for a full investigation, and further that we examine whether we need a new entity to handle this situation going forward, because at this point I do not have faith in Con Edison. Questions on this immediate situation? Yes?
You mentioned when you started talking, Mayor, that you feel like there's a bigger problem here, there's a bigger issue with Con Ed. Elaborate on that. What is that bigger problem?
Look, Con Ed is a private company that is heavily regulated, but they're still a private company. They're not accountable to the public in the way a public agency would be. The Department of Environmental Protection provides water to the people in New York City. If at some point the water was shut off, we, the city government, would have to provide immediate answers. We'd have to show people that it was being fixed, and we knew exactly why it happened and exactly how it would not happen again. Con Ed is very haughty about this. They don't give real answers, and they don't feel they have to. So I think it begs the question of whether a private company should continue to provide a service if they are not accountable to the public.
There you go.
Second choice.
Dead ass.
Although it is easier, in the Marianne Williamson case, it's like, hey, Marianne, when you're not dunking on Dave, like, shouldn't you be like writing another book or developing another seminar? In Bill's case, you could say like, that's great, Bill. Dunk on Beto, but fix the subways. But you know what? This is a good.
Well, he doesn't. I mean, the subways are really more the problem.
He does not have control of the subways. This is true. But this is actually. But honestly, though, this is actually a perfect fusion because he should be doing more of this. Both, by the way, just tactically talking about universal pre-K and actually bragging about his record, and then taking other examples to do something like this where he's dealing with a city crisis that he still is mayor of, also as a trial balloon to show that he's got an agenda.
Putting all the politics aside, in terms the electoral politics aside, the idea of the country's of the mayor of the largest city in the country, who, being mayor of this city is, from an executive perspective, an extremely challenging job. The idea of the mayor of this city coming out and calling for what would be, equivalent to the nationalization of our energy supply, our energy producers and deliverers, I think is quite significant. And this is important. And if for nothing else, de Blasio needs to be elevated on some level, just because, to my mind, he's the most prominent national figure who has even floated this idea. I don't even know if I've even heard anybody float the idea. And it's absolutely the case. There is absolutely no reason why our energy is provided by private companies. There's absolutely no reason. We heavily regulate them to the point where it's obvious that the market cannot handle it. And so the only reason why we don't nationalize this at this point is like tradition and some type of like weird superstition.
Fealty to the private sector.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously moneyed, interests that are involved in this. But in terms
ideology.
But in terms of like the public, I don't think the public contemplates it as an ideological thing. I think it's just sort of tradition. And had it always been the case, but there's no reason why we have private entities doing, owning the pipelines for our cable. And there's no reason why we have private entities delivering us energy. These should be government services. There's no difference.
North Dakota is suing the federal government to to compensate themselves for the policing of the protests for Dakota Access Pipeline. So I mean, how about make Energy Transfer Partners pay for it?
There we go.
Or nationalize them.
And
right.
Anyone who thinks that utilities would be less efficient as a public enterprise has clearly never tried to deal with Time Warner Cable.
Right, of course. I mean, of course. And you could still, if Time Warner Cable wants to still be the delivering of services, let them do it. Let them do it. You can have Time Warner. You can subscribe to Time Warner or Verizon or whoever it is.
Or a municipal broadband that both of those will try to sue out of existence.
Exactly. We're going to take over your cables. We're going to put it in there. I mean, Verizon's a perfect example of like, we're not getting any innovation out of that. They put down the fiber. They realize like, oh, we can't make enough money off the fiber. So we're not going to offer it in the places that we pretended we were going to offer it. Well, here's my plan. We'll take over your fiber business. We'll put it in there with union workers all across the country. We're going to put fiber in every single person's home, the last mile or two, maybe a little bit different. You want to do the last mile? Maybe we could talk about that. But we're going to run fiber across this country. It's going to be accessible to everybody. You want to offer the DVR service? Great. You want to offer, your TV service, your on-demand service? Great. Go ahead. You guys we'll give the private companies the content, but we're putting this service into everybody's home. Same with the electricity. The electricity that I get is no different from the electricity that people across the country get.
Number 2, Bill. Number 2, number 3.
It's also easier to make it a site of struggle when something becomes a nationalized public utility, right?
What do you mean a site of struggle?
Like, you can go protest for energy justice outside of Con Ed, or you can do it outside of, a government agency, and I feel like the latter will be a little more effective.
Well, if it's a government agency, theoretically, the idea would be that it is some form of economic justice. By making it a public entity,
robots are going to take your jobs.
It will not make a difference whether you're putting this in a wealthy community or not a wealthy community.
I mean, there's
or
still plenty of
area.
malfeasance that could happen. As we know, the state is not always fair to everyone historically.
Of course.
But I think you're going to get more bang for your buck trying to protest and struggle against the state than you will a private company.
People talk about the DMV not being good. My experience with the DMV is usually pretty good. My experience with the post office is also usually pretty good.
Yeah, I had to go to the passport office.
Imagine if we funded the post office.
I'm always impressed at how efficient it is when I go to the passport office.
These are pretty good services. I don't know. Have anybody tried to... I waited on hold for Verizon to get my cable fixed for over an hour the other day. For over an hour. That's longer than I've ever waited at the DMV.
Now you know how the listeners feel.
On that. Competition, guess what competition did? It did not kick in.